this is video 3 in this Ancient Aliens Folio series, I guess it is now. First video, I did a flip through of this journal for the hashtag Makers Creative Collab hosted by PM Artist Studios. And last video, I showed the process of how I made the cover. And this video is going to be all about the innards. So I'm going to get right to it. This one we did in the cover journal, and I didn't show in the video how I did this. It's just a pamphlet stitch with some gold thread on the spine. Anyways, so the first print we start with is this one here, but then you're going to see various like going back and forth because I didn't go in order. I just kind of went back and forth between the elements to find what I liked and put it together, you know, in an order that seemed to flow the best. So I've got my 5x7 jelly plate here, and I'm just going to be adding the colors of the paints I'm using in the brand when I first introduce it, and then I do a lot of repetition of the colors. And I'm just using a shelf liner there and a dish dryer rack that I got both of these from the dollar store. I just wanted to show that you can use household items to make patterns as well. And I thought this was kind of like a cool portal looking type of dealio. So once that's dry, I do a pickup print using the back of a sheet from my last video. And this was an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper. And after I pulled the print, I then cut down to the edge of where the 8 by 10 jelly plate left the print, if that makes sense. And here I'm using a stencil I got from Amazon. It was like a pack of smaller circular stencils, and I'm using some gold, champagne gold stencil butter to create my sort of portal points. And it's nice and creamy, really easy to use. And it does take a while to dry though, so when I finish with the stencil, you'll see I'll place it face down on my 5x7 plate, and we'll do a pickup print with that later. It gives us some nice crusty bits. So there I am on the left. You can see I put it down on the plate. And then I just use the leftover stencil butter that's on my spatula there to fill in the surround and pick up some more. Just haphazardly, not making it too even or precious. Make sure you seal up your stencil butter. And so here's that leftover crusty bits, and I'm using this stencil. It's an ATC size 2 by 3 inches from PM Artist Studios. And instead of burrowing through it, I decided to just use it to make some texture. So I'll just lay down the stencil, pick it up, burrow over it. PM's Artist Studios call that shadow technique. So it's cool to have a name for that process. And then I'm just picking up a little bit extra. Once that's dry, I'm going to use this sheet of business cards to pick it up. I explained the business card idea in my previous video when I talk about the cover. And it's like a linen finish, Avery business card pack. This doesn't pull up the full amount, but just kind of add layers, keep adding layers. And the front surface here is done with alcohol inks. I don't have any video footage of that. Now here's a piece I had done using a Robin McClendon technique using fabric dimensional paint on the jelly plate, and I will do another one so you'll see how that's done. And I'm just adding to it using this surfboard stencil. It's a Patty Tolly pear stencil from iStencils, and it gives a cool design. So I add that on there, pull it off. You can see how that looks really neat. And when I add a bit more pattern using that shelf liner again, I'm really happy with the result. So once that's dry, I'm going to pick it up on another piece of paper, but here we're going back and forth. Sorry, it's all messed up. And here's the technique using the dimensional fabric paint. You just kind of put it on, smush it down, and you get several prints from this. It's very thick. It takes a long time to dry. So here I'm picking up a bit more and yet a bit more, and I'll put those aside to dry. And the one on the plate, I let that dry for quite a while before I try to pick it up. So put that aside. So here we're doing the pickup of that leftover from the surfboard stencil. And I'm really happy with this one. I think it looks pretty cool. I like the gold on there. Now I'm going to be using some of my hand carved stamps that I showed how I made in my previous video. And here I'm just adding some green and some toning down with that Payne's gray. And we're going to use some of the off prints from the last video and this video on the business cards. So I'm removing the paint from the deli plate and adding it to the business cards there. And I'm not being super careful with placement. And make sure you clean off the acrylic paint from your stamps. And this little stamp I did in a video quite a while ago, and I'll link that one below. It's like a dumbbells and tangle design. And then we're going to pick it up. Got a bit too much of that paint. You know when you get end of the paint and you have to squeeze it really hard and you just get like a big blob of paint. So I tried to put some back, but wasn't able to. So I'm using the back of that first print to pick that up. And you can see that paper I use on the left to pick up the extra paint. I kind of end up using that later. So I use a bit more of the PBO blue or Pebeo to add to that, try to pick up as much of those crusty bits as I can. And this I'm going to cut out, and it's going to be the background in a little, behind a little door scene. I kind of make it like an alien landscape. And here I decide to add a bit of gold and green to those business cards to add like a glaze to it to give it more depth. And I still don't know how I'm using them yet. I just kind of playing, just play and see how things come together. So I'm pretty happy with that. And then I'm adding some detail to some of the prints. I didn't find this was quite dark enough, so I decided to add it to some of the business cards. Those business cards, again, you can see that in my previous video about making the journal cover. And I want to make it a bit bolder, so I use the Nouveau embellishment mousse. I think it's gunmetal. Not sure. They don't have the name of the color on the actual jar, and I threw the packaging out. So I'm adding a nice thick layer of that to the center of this little jelly print. And then I don't want to waste any of that lovely stuff, so I wipe it off onto the business card to add to it. Again, just playing, making a mess. It's all fun. All right, so here's that 5x7 plate with the fabric paint on it, and I'm going to add it to the back of that other print. Now the fabric paint is mostly dry, but really it's not fully dry. So you'll see I have a bit of trouble getting it off the plate. So I use a little trick that I've used in previous videos where you put a bit of golden matte medium, which is basically like clear acrylic, and it acts like a glue. And I use that to try to get the full image picked up because I didn't want to wait, longer to pick it up. So here we have our crusty bit page. And now I'm showing how I use some of those business cards to make a little booklet to make an insert for my journal. And I'm just using some archival ink to edge. I think it was like a dark green and maybe aqua blue, and some washi tape to make sure those stay together in a booklet form. I used a bit of that glitter glue and I think the glue stick, because the washi tape won't stay on there, especially with the acrylic paint on there. And I think I used this on the journal cover or somewhere, and it had the gunmetal Nouveau embellishment mousse. So I'm just cleaning it off onto the jelly plate. So I'm going to add, that's going to be a layer on the plate. And I'm using my other hand carved stamp. This one's based on a hypnotic Zentangle. And I'm removing it from my 5x7 plate and adding it haphazardly to my 8x10 plate. And you can see on the 5x7 plate, I've got all the little circles facing each other, so it's a different pattern than what I have on the 8x10 plate. Because the theme for this month's hop or challenge with the PM Artist Studios group called Makers Mixed Media, it was patterns at play. So that's why we're playing with all these patterns. And here I show that you can use other household items like placemats. I know Robin McClendon uses a lot of placemats, or she used to, on her jelly plate, and that's where I think I got the idea from originally, but I have tons of placemats from the dollar store that I just use on the jelly plate. I don't use them in my kitchen. And we're going to pick up that little 5x7 print. And it's quite a strong color. I end up toning that down a little bit later. Put it aside to dry, and then we'll pick this one up now that it's dry with some gold. And using the back surface of that previous print, you can see how I trimmed it down from 8.5 by 11 to 8 by 10. And I don't know what order these are going in yet. I kind of play back and forth to figure out how it flows. And these are the business cards. There's my little alien landscape that I'm going to put behind these little doors. And when I'm inking the edges, I am using that archival ink because later I do add some water-soluble medium to kind of grunge things up. And again, that washi tape's not going to stick well unless you add some stronger glue. So I add some more of that glitter glue. Really going back and forth here. The paper ripped a bit, so I just used some glue stick to tack it down and cover it with a little bit of the gold paint to blend it in. So I like that. And here we are back at the business cards. So this one I'm going to make like a little pop-up, like a little, I don't know, vertical booklet. And I add some embossing embellishments using my hand-carved stamps. And I also use this little Versamark or Distress embellishment pen to add a little eye, like a little spiral eye in the middle there. And Inktense, I'm using Inktense pencils with some water to add some depth and some shading. So I had to speed everything up so much. It was just too long. It's like 4 hours of footage. It was even longer than that to make all these pages. Here you can really see the organic feeling that that fabric paint gives when you highlight it with an iridescent or a metallic. Now I'm just toning down that green strip by adding a bit of blue. This background paper and strip I had done in the previous video when I was making the journal cover. So I'm just kind of putting things together. So I don't know about you, but I find it really fun to just kind of play without a plan of where something's going, just sort of let it evolve. Here I'm just adding what feels right, what colors that feel right, using my handmade stamps that I made in my last video, and just staying within the same color palette just helps you can tie a bunch of different pages together. And the theme of patterns at play was a really fun one to play with because I chose to make these hand-carved stamps that I could use in different ways to make different patterns. And it was just a really fun way to be creative. So thanks again, PM Artist Studios, for that fun prompt. I highly recommend you check out that video hop if you haven't seen it already. But also if you go to PM Artist Studios YouTube, you'll find a link there to their Facebook group, which is another area that you can see lots of other artwork created with this prompt. So you can see I added a lot of detail to the border of this print to just give it more depth. And to the little portal, I'm adding a bit of grunging with some sprays. And then I'll be adding some Inktense pencils to make that portal, the circular nature of it, kind of stick out a bit more. So I freehand one of the circles, and then the other two I use a template. And the nice thing about the Inktense pencils is you use water to activate it. Once it's dry, it's fairly permanent. So when I add distressing to different areas, it doesn't run. I made a little band there to hold this little booklet. Just adding a bit more ink to the edges, and then you'll see I distress this booklet a bit more using just some black craft paint and some water. Let it run, let it drip, get messy, have fun, add some splatters. And I do let it dry in between coats of this distressing process so the paper doesn't fall apart. And here I'm going to be doing a pickup print of some of that paint that was left over with the sprays and some of that extra stamping on the jelly plate. It's just using a titanium buff, a nice neutral color. And that kind of fits in well with the color scheme, so we'll use it later. And I'm adding a glaze to this smaller print. I just found the green was a bit too bold. So just toned it down, added a bit of shimmeriness to it. And then I didn't want to lose those stamped images, so I highlight just a couple of them with some archival, just a black archival ink. Just off stamp it first so it's not too strong. And it just kind of brings that pattern back. And more distressing, so here's where it's handy to have used archival products because I'm adding a lot of water, getting messy. And again, I'm drying in between coats. And I felt this border needed a little something, so I added some gold puffy paint, like fabric paint, trimming the edges. And I decided to cover this half of that paper with the new print I just pulled using that titanium buff. I'm using Yes paste. I find it dries nice and flat. Trim it down. I use this Nouveau expanding mousse. I don't know the color. This is a pictograph stencil also by Patty Tully Parrish from iStencils. And this is kind of neat, this mousse, because when you heat it, it actually puffs up and expands and gets kind of crunchy. There you can see it kind of getting all crunchy. Once that's dry and not hot anymore, I add a bit of black archival ink to just distress it a bit, and some of these metallic pastes, which I don't know, I think they're Stampin' Up, they're really old. So now I've got my order of pages pretty much set, and I decide that this area needs a focal point. So I use that stencil again with the Nouveau embellishment mousse, and it's pretty hard to spread. I decide to leave some of it open and add the gold stencil butter. So we have sort of a two-toned piece there. Just clean up the edges while it's wet, and I set that aside to dry. Making sure to not waste any of that stencil butter, just sort of flip it over onto the other page. And add a bit more gold highlight to my inky blobs. Now these business cards are dry, so I can add some highlights to the raised areas. And then I have this great idea, why don't I use the stencil so that I don't go off of the symbol so much. So I'm pretty happy with that. Fold that up and put it in its little belly band. I don't have any footage of this, but I used this stencil to add a pattern inside of that little vertical booklet. When I was testing my handmade stamps, I had done some patterns on paper, so I used that to make a little pocket so that can tuck right in there. I used this pickup print to make a focal point for this page, and I want it to mirror the page I'd already done. So we glue that down with some Yes paste. And I like how it's like matching, like one was a stencil strip and one was a mask, so they kind of go together. And then I decorate the border using my handmade stamps and some archival ink. And then I'm gonna add some more detail with the Inktense pencils. And I really feel like those two pages go well together. So here's the Inktense pencils to add some depth to it, and then I believe I distressed the edges using that Posca, which is a acrylic paint pen. And when before it dries, you can smudge it with a baby wipe or with water, and that's how I did a lot of my distressing. Now I'm using the Inktense to highlight this focal point on this page, and I make another little pocket using embossing powders. I didn't show that either. And just making sure the edges have some distressing on them. And this little extra insert, I just use the leftover pieces that I made to decorate it. And then we'll stamp a design on the cover. And we're getting close to being done. This really was a labor of love. I just got enthralled and immersed in it, and I just kept going till it was finished. Sometimes it's helpful to have a deadline because I had to have my video done for the hop. So I had all my pages done, and I sewed them into the journal cover, and I decided this other page needed a focal point. So I did a magazine image transfer of this water droplet, and I just put it right in there even though it was already sewed in, and I highlighted that water droplet with the Intense pencil, and voila! Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed that little process video. I did have 4 hours of footage that I cut down as much as possible. This I didn't show in the video, I don't think. This little magic mesh scrapbooking thing that I used to hold that together. So I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks so much for watching, and please like, subscribe, and share, and all those YouTubey things. Bye for now.